Welcome to the Journey Through Homeschooling podcast, practical support for every step of your homeschool adventure. I'm Jami Thornsberry.
And I'm Adonna Pryor.
And today we are going to talk about passing on your passions. And this is something, Adonna, that you have really introduced me to. I've heard you say it a lot over the last several years as we've spoken to homeschool families, spoken at homeschool fairs, and just in general conversation oftentimes with new homeschool families who are really questioning, what do I do with my kids? What kind of curriculum do I buy? What, what's going to fit our family best? And often your response to that is pass on your passions. Start there with what you're passionate about. If you're a mom who is afraid of teaching your children, thinking that you can't do this, this is one of those things that, Adonna, you continually encourage moms in, is start with what you're passionate about and do that with your kids. And so today I want to talk a little bit about first what it means to pass on your passion to your kids, and then how you do that as a mom, because I think you're really good at that. And this isn't just a cliche saying for you.
Right.
Because your kids are reflective, your adult children are reflecting the passions that they inherited from you. So let's start at the beginning. So tell me, what is passing on your passion?
That would be passing on what the Lord has given to you. So the gifts that the Lord has given to you, the things that you enjoy about life, and using those gifts to teach your children. So this is something that my parents did, but they didn't really do it on purpose. So my mother would sing constantly. My mother was in choir and church choir almost her entire life, and she would be humming or singing constantly. There was always that music in the background if she were, outside doing work, whatever she was doing. And you hear it constantly, you pay attention to it. When I went to, in sixth grade, when we did this little test, the high school band director came over and did a test to see if you might be interested in playing band. And they did a rhythm test. Well, I scored extremely high on the rhythm test. I was able to pick out a lot of different rhythms. And I didn't play an instrument. I did, I picked out a couple things on our piano that we had at home. But I attribute that to the fact that we were always listening to music in the house. My mother was either singing, or my father had on, one of his Western. He loved the old Western guys from the 40s and 50s. He would have that on, or maybe gospel music. And it was just always part of the background of whatever we were doing. Also, my father, who owned a business at the airport, we were always at the airport. Always, 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 always. And you just picked up things from him. We would be flying places in a small plane. He would let you fly the plane. He would sit you on his lap. When we were little kids, we would sit on his lap, and he would pretend, you get to pretend that you're flying the plane. And then as we aged, he would actually let us fly it. So there are things that we just picked up naturally, and I don't think that they set out and said intentionally, we're going to teach our kids the things that we love. For me, I wanted to make my parents happy, so I invested time in learning those things. I was part of choir at church. I enjoyed spending time at the airport with my dad. So these are, as I've said over and over again, these are the things that the Lord was teaching me early in my life that he would bring back when I started homeschooling. One of the very first families I met at a co-op, the father was a professional in a particular sport. He lived locally. He had made his career in this particular sport. And he was talking about teaching his children homeschooling and all the different things that he was going to do. And I remember sitting at the table and I looked at him and I said, well, why don't you teach them how to play your sport? And he looked at me across the table and he was confused. He said, what? I said, well, you love it. You're good at it. You have the equipment. Why don't you teach them how to play the sport? And he literally hadn't thought that that would be part of his homeschool career. That he would be. And it was amazing to me that that was removed from his thinking. Here is a man who, for his entire youth, had spent his life perfecting his sport, and now he's homeschooling children, and that's not part of what he thinks is homeschooling. Is passing down that love of what he did. He was perfect at his sport. That's how he made his career. And I thought, what? Why aren't you just teaching them how to do that?
So we have some really good friends, and the husband of these really good friends works in an industry that he was very leery about presenting that as an option for his kids to go into. Just because of, the general nature and environment of that industry. And yet one of his children actually now is heading into that atmosphere. And they had lots of talks about why that child's, picked or was moving in that direction. And so I wonder if it's the same, for this gentleman that you're talking about, and maybe for many parents who think, I don't want to push my kids into something that really isn't, for them, or that, I don't want to live my dream through them, or, whatever that hang up is.
I think that was definitely part of it. But instead of presenting it and saying, this is what I like to do, let's learn a skill. You don't have to do it every day. You don't have to do what I did. Let's just play around with it and see if you like it. If you're good at it, then if you want to do it, we can move forward. He removed it completely from his thought process. That wasn't something that he thought would be valuable in the homeschooling realm. And I didn't, for me, what I realized at that point was it didn't really matter what I was bringing to the table. If I had a passion for that subject, then that's going to come through in what I'm teaching. And they're more likely to be interested in it instead of me sitting there maybe reading aloud out of a textbook and I have no interest in what it is I'm reading. So when we came to homeschooling, that's where I started. We did unit studies, and the first thing I started with was a unit on plants in science, because I had worked for 10 years in the nursery industry. So we started with plants and we started with flight. These are the things I understood. So I knew that I could at least not fail. And for me, that was kind of the parameters for my beginning homeschooling. Let's not fail. I had a really interesting discussion with my husband today. We were talking about the things that we normally talk about at lunch with our kids, and that would be Chernobyl, because, everybody talks about the process. This is why a nuclear plant exploded while they're having lunch. Anyway, we were talking about this processes and cooling rods and all sorts of things. And my husband said, in engineering, you always assume that whatever you're doing is going to, at some point, find the path to destruction. And your goal is to block as many paths to destruction as you possibly can. And this little light bulb went on in my head. And I went, oh, what a brilliant thing. What a life lesson. You're really instead of working really diligently to make something function, you are spending a tremendous amount of time blocking all of the paths that lead to destruction. So that is exactly, when I look back, that is exactly how I started my homeschool journey. I was trying to block as many pathways to destruction as I possibly can. And one of them was my failure, my presenting them with a subject that I had no clue what was going on. So I started with, hey, let's start with the things I know.
Let's start with the things I'm likely not to fail at.
I'm probably not going to fail when we go outside and look at plants. I can do this. We can grow plants. I've done this before. I did this. People paid me to do this. I can do this. So that is essentially where we started. And then as we went through and continued to learn and look at different curriculum, I realized that not only was I starting from a really good, solid place, but then I could build on it things I didn't know, but I could go to the internet or I could go to a book and I could read and add to that knowledge and then pour into them. So I always tell people, start with what you know, start with what you're passionate about. And if there's not anything that you know, then maybe try something your husband knows or something that the child knows. Interest-led homeschooling is not a bad thing. I think our biggest problem as moms is we tend to look at our skills and belittle them and think, well, that doesn't have value. We look at it and we say, well, cleaning, I really am good at cleaning bathrooms. That doesn't have value. Yes, it does. I'm really good at baking. I'm really good at, grocery shopping. I'm good at organizing the whatever it is you're good at organizing. That has a huge amount of value. And you can start wherever you think your skill is. So that's what we did. Next, we would go to things that are, again, silly, nonsense kinds of things. Film, I love old black and white movies. And, of course, I really loved studying ancient history. Specifically, what my passion is going through the Old Testament books of the Bible, fitting them into a logical time frame, and then finding out who was alive during that time frame. So making those connections. I didn't like in history or in any subject, they were all disconnected. In school, you would have a class from, whatever time to whatever time, first period, second period, third period, and none of them had anything to do with the class before it or after it.
Right.
They were all separated.
And none of it had anything to do with your everyday life.
No, it didn't. So you ended up in classes in high school saying, why am I doing this? Why do I care what Shakespeare wrote? Why do I care about, Rembrandt? Why do I care about Picasso? Why do I care about Beethoven? Why do I care about what John Adams said? The teacher would try and make connections, but their knowledge of the subject was limited because when they got their teaching degree, they didn't get a degree in history. They didn't get a degree in math. They got a degree in how to teach. Mm-hmm. So they didn't, in many cases, the only thing they knew was that limited scope of what they had been told to teach. A particular time frame in history or a particular way of teaching ninth grade English, right? I'm going to teach high school English. So you tend to, when you're so focused, you tend to lose track of the big picture. And that's what you weren't getting in school. When you're homeschooling, especially when you're starting with the things that you're interested in, you can start from this really tiny little place and expand it. So I loved looking at Old Testament history. I really loved trying to find people that were mentioned in every single, secular history book and plugging them into who was alive when. What Pharaoh was alive during the time of David or Solomon. When you're reading through the prophets in the Old Testament, they really can seem very disconnected if you read them in the order they're written. But if you find and plug them into a time frame and you know who's in charge, the king that's in charge, why they're saying what they're saying. Are they in captivity? Is it before they're in captivity? Or is it after they're out of captivity? Who is the reigning empire?
Yeah.
that made such a huge difference in how you understood what the prophet was saying. And I loved just sitting down with a map and going through all of that. So that's where we started. And because I liked starting with Bible, we would start with history and then plug things in. And if we got to science, we got to science, right? But generally, I found a book ages and ages ago that has a list of all of the things that were invented or were occurring in a particular time frame. So we would open it and say, okay, we're looking at, the year 1500 BC. So let's see what's around in 1500 BC.
Yeah.
What scientific inventions, what kind of art is around. And then you could go 100 years, couple hundred years before, couple hundred years after, to pull in different types of art, different kinds of cultures, and pull them in. I loved doing that. That was what I was passionate about. And while I was doing that, I was learning more and more and more about the thing that I liked. Mm-hmm. So I'm literally doing what I love to do and dragging the kids along with me.
Yeah, and the reality is that when somebody gets really excited about something, the people around them, the people that they're talking to, tend to get really, really excited about that thing. And so you were using that natural momentum that you had for a subject to help ignite an excitement about it in your children and an adventurousness about it, because it wasn't just, here's what we're going to learn in this 15 minutes or in this, from what we're reading in this book. We're going to see what else we can, find or dig up. It was almost like, being like a historical archaeologist of sorts.
Yeah. And once you began a particular thing, you would get asked questions, because children's curiosity is amazing. Mm-hmm. And they would start peppering me with questions. As long as we had reliable internet connection, I would pull up, if I didn't know what it was, and generally I didn't know what the answer to their question was, I would say, oh, that is really cool. I don't know. Let's look at that. We would go down so many rabbit trails, and we had a blast on every single one of those rabbit trails. Was fun. There wasn't anything that you would stop and say, oh yeah, I don't know. Occasionally, maybe one you would go down and go, oh yeah, look, he's hanging people from a pike. Isn't that cool? Well, now we know.
Yeah, but the 12-year-old is like, look, Mom, that's cool.
Isn't that cute? Well, isn't Caligula, don't name your children Caligula. Let's just move on with our life. But it almost every single one of those rabbit trails was fun. And because they had begun that conversation, they were invested in some way, and they wanted to know the answer, and they were excited to know the answer. Sometimes it was blah, sometimes it wasn't blah, sometimes it was fun and it led to other rabbit trails. But that's essentially where we started. And through that, the Lord taught me the value of doing what you can where you are with what you have. Yeah. Those were the three things that really drove me. And when I say we had no money when we began, I really mean we didn't have extra money to spend on this. Right before our oldest was born, my husband, the business my husband works for, did a wonderful thing. They hired a fund analyst to come and talk with every single person that worked for them and help them, budget, because the business was going to put in a type of an IRA fund, and they wanted the employees to know what to do. And he asked for our budget. So I handed him my budget. I think I was about 6 months pregnant with our oldest. I handed him our budget, and Jeff brought it back from work, and he looked at me and he said, the man said she's doing everything she can. And I was like, well, thank you. I'm very happy with that. So it was, we were in a place where the Lord was really saying, do what you can with what you have where you are. And that began with, what do I know? What do I already have the knowledge of? I was blessed throughout my entire life to have a lot of different experiences. My father had several different jobs, but one of those jobs, actually both of those jobs put me in a position to meet a lot of different people. And he was always bringing me to work. There were things that we would do when we moved to the town we live in. He sold his business at an airport and began working at the business where he had been years ago. And that was at PBS. So he worked at a local PBS station. We were at ball games, filming ball games. We were at auction shows where the PBS station was trying to make money during their annual auction fundraiser. I was learning how to run a camera. I was learning how to be in front of a camera. I was learning how to pull cords and cables around, how to tape them to the floor, all of these things. And they let me do it. All of the people that worked there were more than happy to have, this teenager hanging out with them and teaching them things. And they would hand me these big cameras and say, okay, you sit right there. But it really was a tremendous experience for me, every job that my dad had, because he always pulled me in. He always pulled all of us in. And part of that was we were volunteering. We were volunteering for PBS when we did that. When we did things at the airport, we were volunteering for an air show. So that introduced me to the other part of what I had a passion of, and that is, if you can help somebody, then do so. Volunteer in the community. And we've always done that.
Yeah.
When we began in the co-op, we would show up early and we would, help set up tables, help take down tables, help clean things up. What do you need us to do? And that's just always been one of the things I've said to my kids. Well, let's just stay. We can do this. We've got 10 minutes. Let's just help them take down tables. It's not going to take us long. Let's just help take down tables. And I would look at them and say, we want to leave it looking better than when we got here. So we want to leave it looking better than when we got here. And that's just a consistent thing. And again, came from my life experience, because I worked as a custodian for several years in a church building. So I knew what it was like when people didn't leave the building better. They didn't even leave it the same. They left it much worse. And one of the things that I heard people say consistently as they left the church building, these are Christian people. They would say, well, they've got people to clean that up. They've got people to do that. They've got folk that'll do that. And that was their reasoning why they weren't being good stewards of the building that they had just left a function with. I always loathed that statement. And so when we were doing a co-op, I would say, hey, no, this is not what we're doing. We're not leaving the tables out. We're not leaving trash on the floor. We're not even leaving trash in the bag in the kitchen unless they tell us that's where we're supposed to be. If they've got their dumpsters locked, we're done. If they don't have their dumpsters locked, we're bagging it up. We're taking it out there. We're putting it in the dumpster. So again, another passion of mine, passing it on, volunteering, making sure you're good stewards of the buildings you're being allowed to use. You're being blessed with to use. Even if you pay them a rent, make sure you're being good stewards of that. All of these things, I think in the world's mind, are small. But in God's mind, I knew that these were steps he wanted us to be taking.
Yeah.
He wanted us to start with small things and be good stewards of those small things. So that was my initial attempt. And that's where I went. And that's why it's a passion of mine. I think that it was, for me, it was the perfect place to start. And it continued on because I kept learning. And from that, I started learning about math. And when my husband would teach math, because that's his passion, and I would sit and listen to him teach, I thought, wow, this guy's got a talent. He's really good at this. Then his passion kind of flowed into the rest of us. You're like, oh, really? This is a great concept. And you caught on to it. So it wasn't just me that was doing that. It was my husband that was passing that on. But it didn't involve any curriculum.
Yeah.
It didn't involve any money. It just involved saying, this is what I like to do. And maybe we would spend money. Maybe, something like in baking.
Right.
We would go and say, let's plan a meal and anything you want, I will buy whatever meal you want to buy. And I ate that when it came to, I want everyone to have salmon. Well, okie dokie. How about catfish? What about flounder? What do you think about flounder? Right.
Or maybe it's tuna. Salmon one day, right, and beans and rice the next day.
Is salmon in a can acceptable to you? No, Mom, I want the big. Okay, let's try that. So sometimes that did come back to bite me, but we did invest in quality baking pans so that they wouldn't be upset when a cookie would burn. Yeah. There was less likely that it would burn because we had a pan. We were
cake
watching
they were making stuck to the bottom of the pan.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of that happening. But so many lessons are learned in that. Physics. So many science lessons learned while cooking.
Yeah.
Patience. Oh my goodness. At Christmas, my mother made candy, so we would sit there and make different kinds of candy, and you get tired waiting for that thermometer to reach 325.
Yeah. You
go, Mom, we've been here for 10 minutes. I know. Keep stirring.
Building up the muscles.
Exactly.
You can count that as like a part of your PE credit.
No, and I would go back. To Proverbs 30 whenever we would do something in the kitchen like that. And I would say, I would reach over and I would, grab somebody's hand and I would squeeze it. And I would say, you feel that grip? I said, do you know how I got that grip? I got that grip from the nursery industry, from grabbing pots 3 at a time with one hand and picking it up and moving it. I said, this is a killer grip, but let's go to Proverbs 30. And God says about that woman that she has strength in her arms. Mm-hmm. I said, she got that strength in her arms from doing work. It may be kneading bread. It may be lifting pots of plants. I said, but that woman that is being praised in that chapter, she's got strong arms. So don't ever look down on the fact that we're working hard in this kitchen and we're getting strong arms in here.
For sure.
Because this is a valued thing.
So you are building on much more than your passions. It makes me think of, Charlotte Mason talks a lot about education as an atmosphere. Mm-hmm. And within you passing on your passion, you are creating an atmosphere of learning, a natural, curiosity, right, a natural learning environment. You are kind of curating that space for your kids to not just receive the passion that you had, but to then be able to imagine and pursue their own passions. Because, learning about that in one context, totally sparks new imagination, new desires as we're learning. And your kids have some of the most amazing passions that just make me smile every time I see them, walking them out. And as moms, we're not just looking to teach our kids how to read, how to write, how to do math. We're teaching them how to live life. And that's one of the things that we talked about most recently in a homeschool fair is that, oftentimes we get so focused on what we want our kids to learn that we forget that every minute they are learning. Mm-hmm. If they're looking, if they're witnessing a conversation between you and your husband,
right,
they're learning how husbands and wives interact.
Right.
If, you're taking them to the grocery store, as you've talked about before, and you're striking up conversation with the cashier, they're learning how to interact with someone in public, right, how to, show respect, how to show kindness. Mm-hmm. You going into the church building and taking them with you and putting down tables and
right,
cleaning up trash really shows them, again, that stewardship option. And not only that, but I think the greatest reward is that it fosters relationship, right? Because it's not just about, getting worksheets done. There's a whole relationship. And again, Charlotte Mason talks about the relationship we have with, subjects and the things we learn. And so it's deepened the relationship that you have with your children. And it's made them want to continue relationship with the things that they've learned and the desires that they have.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to pull away from this, especially if you're starting your journey in homeschooling, is that what I'm not saying is we looked at every subject in great depth and we knew exactly what we were doing everywhere. Right. We were doing what we wanted to do, and we were very simple. It didn't have to be in depth. It didn't have to involve worksheets. It didn't have to involve textbooks. It could be something really simple, and then if they wanted to continue on with that, they certainly could. So I have children that have continued on in a bunch of different paths, but they love, each of them loves and has a talent for what they're doing. So that's really where I wanted to have a foundation of having a lot of knowledge, and having the ability to find that knowledge, and having the continue to have the curiosity. I didn't want to squelch their curiosity, and I didn't want to squelch their natural affection for learning. They're always going to learn.
Yeah.
They're always going to be curious, and I wanted that to happen because there are going to be holes. I can't block every path of failure, every path of destruction. I can't block every single one of them. And they're going to need to have knowledge and wisdom and discernment of their own. And my goal is really just not to squelch that, not to stop that passion that the Lord's giving them for wherever the Lord puts them.
Yeah. So what would be, a couple of first steps for a mom who thinks, I can't teach my kids, but maybe I could pass on my passions to them. And maybe that could be where we start with our homeschooling.
Yeah. So first step, and this is what I always did. I would type in free unit study in my computer, and then I would type in the subject, free unit study on leaves. Dun, dun, dun. And what's going to pop up is, oh, hey, look, here's free fall unit study, falling leaves unit study, free homeschool scientist, the DIY homeschooler. I have videos popping up from YouTube that describe different kinds of leaves and the different parts of leaves. I've got, look, there's something from classroom. There's a year-round homeschooler. There's homeschool share. There's homeschool printables. There's all sorts of things popping up. The crafty classroom, lesson plans, all of these. I could just sit there and click on and say, hey, look, here's a video front on YouTube about the structure of leaves. Let's watch this 5-minute video on the structure of leaves. And then we could print out something because there are a couple places that would print out. I always started my search with free unit study or free printable on whatever I was doing, and it would pop up. Yeah. And then I would click on a couple of those and say, oh, look, let's try this. So that was my go-to. Every single evening, you would find me typing in free whatever. And then we would do it. It got to the point where I was doing a co-op class, and one of my children sat there and said, Mom, how do you learn all this? Where did you learn all this? And I looked her straight in the eye and I said, I got this yesterday from a really great website. You're teaching a class? You learned? I certainly am teaching a class. I learned this yesterday. This is absolutely fabulous. But I knew we were going to do this section, so I went and read about it, and this is really fabulous. So it can be that easy. It really can be that easy. And you're learning right along with them. So that's where I started. First step, free unit study. And then whatever subject I was looking at.
Okay. What do you say to the mom who says, what what about the gaps in their learning? Am I going to create gaps in their learning?
There are going to be gaps in everybody's learning. I have gaps in my learning. Einstein had gaps in his learning. My husband is a genius. He's got gaps in his learning. Everyone has gaps in their learning. The Lord is going to know exactly where those gaps are, and he's going to lead you. And they're going to fill in those gaps themselves. I am not the person who taught my child about World War II. I didn't. I did not teach him any of that stuff. He said, I want to learn it. I gave him a book. And they said, oh, I'd like to do this. I gave him another book. Oh, how about that? Gave him another book. I didn't read those books before I gave them to him. I just said, hey, here you go. Have at it, my friend. Read whatever you want to read. And he taught himself. He learned all that stuff. No gaps in his knowledge. He wanted it. He got it.
Yeah. And I think that was the jumping off for him was that he saw you pursuing your passions, you teaching your passions, and he was able to replicate that for his own passions.
Yes. Yes, he was. Yes, he was.
Well, I think that any mom who is feeling, less than in the teaching department can take and replicate your system and figure it out and really develop not just a great homeschool environment, but great relationships with her kids as well. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Adonna, for sharing that. And we will be back next week on the Journey Through Homeschooling podcast, practical support for every step of your homeschool adventure. And we will see you next Wednesday.